Test. Okay. Hey, so I mentioned a while ago that I wanted to start a new series where I would answer questions that I get from YouTube or maybe the Showtime Discord server. And yeah, I would try to give short answers. This is that series. And the first question is from Bad Labs, who asks, what was the reasoning behind the choice of license, MIT, for Zig? And do you think the choice of license is important for a free and open source project? So, first of all, Bad Labs, thank you for the question. That's a very nice way of starting the series. Now, to answer your question, so yes, you pointed out correctly that Zig is MIT license. Now, what is the main reasoning behind the choice? I would argue is the balance that Andrew wanted between fairness and freedom when it comes to using Zig. When it comes to open source licenses, most of the time, like aside from smaller details, smaller but like maybe, let's say more sophisticated details, right? Gotchas and stuff like this. The main difference between different open source licenses is the balance that they strike between fairness and freedom. Because these two ideas tend to be kind of at odds one with another to some degree. Like to impose fairness, you have to restrict certain uses that would be unfair. So for example, GPL licenses force people that make modifications to the software to publish those changes so that they can't make a private proprietary fork of an open source project that is under that license, etc., etc. MIT is a license that very much prioritizes freedom over fairness. And that's the choice that Andrew made for Zig. I think it makes sense. I don't think that that's the right choice for every software project. I think that for a programming language, it's the right choice. And more in general, I think that for a programming language, the choice of license, like the minutiae, matters a bit less because programming languages are very big. And I think that's also one point that I want to make in this answer. We tend to talk a lot about licenses and all the details when it comes to software. But I think that the problem with that is that, well, it's not inherently bad in itself, but we unfortunately tend to forget other very important details when it comes to this stuff, other important properties of our software that are not just the license. So one example of this is the size of the project, like the let's say the lines of code. If you make a minuscule library with 20 lines of code, I would argue that the license doesn't matter much. People are going to, they can very easily make clean room implementations or re-implementations of your library, but also, I mean, they can copy paste it. Are you going to sue people because they're copy pasting 20 lines of your code? I doubt that. I think most people don't have the resources or like the willpower to go through the whole process because somebody copied 20 lines of code. And I think that's important because law is not like programming. Law tends to come after the fact. It's very slow and tedious, and for minor infractions, it's very much not worth it most of the time. So the license, like you can't put any license on any software in practice, or rather you can do that, but then you can't expect then that the license works just as well on every project. So a super small project has this problem. A super big project has other properties that I think are very important. So for example, Zig as a programming language, it kind of is a standard. If you make if you make a proprietary fork of Zig and start changing things, you'll have to somehow convince people to adopt that over Zig. And that's tough. That's really tough. So that's one reason why I think that Zig shouldn't be worried too much about licenses. Aside from smaller gotchas, because I know that licenses are complicated, and I'm personally not a super expert. So I know there are, for example, some interactions between open source licenses, which mainly deal with copyright and how that interacts with patents. So I don't know all the details. But generally speaking, a language has a lot of protection that comes naturally from the nature of the project itself. I think an interesting example of a situation where the project is still big, still moves a lot of money, like produces a lot of value, but it's a, if you will, at least compared to a successful programming language, it's more like medium size. Are databases. Databases are an interesting example where you've seen that there are open source projects, like a lot of databases start as open source projects, then you have the commercial entities that attach themselves to the open source project one way or another, like we were with varying degrees of success and harmony, and they try to push the open source project forward, but also they want to extract value for themselves. They have to survive. Maybe they get venture capital, and when you get venture capital, you know what you have to do next, right? You have to return 10 times as much or whatever. And that's not all, because you also have the clouds who, when it comes to this particular case, they are the most fervent supporters of open source because they want to use the thing for free. They don't want to pay the commercial entity who actually kind of would love to get a slice of the pie. I think that's a case where nobody is the good guy. It's complicated. Everybody tries to spin the story for their benefit, but the point is, that's a case where the license can make a lot of difference because you're not big enough as a programming language is to, in a sense, produce enough value for everybody so that they don't have to fight each other. So yeah, I think that was interesting. So yeah, I do think that the license matter, but here's the thing. When it comes to database, and this is something that I learned, is that the fact is that databases are an unfortunate example. They are very susceptible to this type of problem because they are big in terms of lines of code. They are big in terms of the value that they produce, but they tend not to have super active communities. Now, maybe this could be considered a fault of the project maintainers of databases, at least the ones that I know of. Or maybe it's just the nature of the product, but people do care about databases, but not as much as languages. And the result is that with these basically big projects, but without a community. So I think that really the size of your code base and the amount of users that you have and the amount of even like emotional investment that these communities, these users put into the thing that you're doing really matters a lot. And I think it matters at least as much as the license. So I would argue that for a free and open source project, what matters is understanding what the license can do for you and what the license cannot do. And there's a lot of things that the license cannot do for you. And you should also, just like you spend time being deliberate in your license choice, you should spend also time being deliberate in how you design your community. And you have to understand that if you want to have a big project and you want it to be successful and you don't want to be at the mercy of all these fuckers that love to use and abuse licenses and open source and whatever story they can find to, at the end of the day, take your shit and use it for free, you need a community. You need a community that basically shames them publicly. That's the story. That's at least in my opinion the short version of it. Because otherwise they will just shame you into saying that you're stupid because you chose an open source license, and since it's open source, they should be allowed to do whatever they want with it. Which is, at the end of the day, is actually, it's technically correct, right? If the license allows people to do certain things, then you chose it. But obviously, the problem is that the law is a blunt tool, and we should also spend time thinking about other details, because a lot of things play out in a way, based on a system of rules and constraints that it's not the law, and we should not forget that. All these things are important. So That's why I think that as long as Zig is going to have a big community that cares about Zig, that is invested in what the Software Foundation is trying to do, as long as the communication is happens and people know what we are trying to achieve, and they care, I think we're going to be fine. The license at that point matters not that much. I hope that answered the question. So good luck to everybody that wants to start a open source project that ends up being successful. If anybody wants to expand on this concept further, let me know. I'm happy to discuss it further. Also, you can find me on the Showtime Discord server, so that's also a good place. Also, if you have any other question that you want to me to answer in this series, let me know. I'm happy to do that too. And finally, usual stuff, like, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. We're getting slowly closer to 2,000 subscribers. That's nice. YouTube gives me pocket change for that. I don't know. I'll have to think about what to do with that too. But anyway, that's another topic for the future. Have a nice day.